All right. Happy Friday Eve, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining in. We are live on Instagram at Coach Stella OC. We are live on Facebook and we are live on YouTube. Thank you all so much for joining in. Welcome back to another series of Career Journeys with Coach Stella. I have the wonderful Constance Wright, who is coming on to share her journey, but I'm going to call it testimony because Constance preaching. Um, so, welcome everyone. Welcome to the space. Happy Thursday Eve. What a week it has been. We are more than halfway through the summer. I don't know about y'all, but I need time to slow down because I am in no rush to get into the winter season. All right. Thank you all so much for joining in. We are going to dive right in. We have another segment of our career journeys, and I'm so excited for you all to join us as we dive into these conversations. We are talking all things law. We are talking all things higher ed. We are talking all things educational systems with the wonderful and talented, multi-talented Constance Wright, Esquire. So, Constance, I always like to give the mic to all my guests to introduce themselves. But before I pass the mic to you, I just want to thank you so much. I know you have been so busy these last not only few weeks, but this past year in all the things that you do. So I thank you so much for taking the time out to share your journey with the people and talk all things of all the many different ways people can be a lawyer in today's world. So thank you so much. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I appreciate anybody who just wants to hear the journey. It's a journey. So I thank you for having me, and hopefully I can just give a bit of, I don't even want to say inspiration. I like people to understand the reality of just the journeys of building a career, the journeys of just managing this process of just like life, building a career, jobs. It is not, I think, what when we're young, we're told. And it's much different. And I think the more people are honest about the journey and not just previewing the highs, it becomes incredibly important. It will normalize the middle road and the lows, and understanding that the highs are literally the sum, middle road and the lows. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, with that, Constance, I would love to give you the mic. Please feel free to introduce yourself, your background, and anything you would like the folks to know as we dive into your journey.
So the quick version of who I am, my name is Constance Wright. I'm from the East Coast. So I was born and raised on the East Coast. The majority of my childhood, well, my childhood is really split from the Bronx and then West Philadelphia. I'm truly East Coast in so many ways that just formed me. I grew up during the height of the war on drugs. I think that's important in this context of the conversation that we have when we talk about education and opportunities. My parents really did a good job of keeping us very educationally focused during that time. And I really do credit my success to having a nurturing environment that really kept us protected and really focused on education and next steps. I went to high school in Philadelphia, Philadelphia High School for Girls 243 class of 99. Always shout out to my high school and the folks there. And then went to college in North Carolina. I'm an alum of North Carolina State University, where I got a BA in sociology, focused on criminal justice and a minor in Spanish. And then I always wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer since the age of 9. And I went to law school here in Chicago. I moved here at 20 years old to go to law school. I went to then the John Marshall Law School. Now it's University of Illinois Chicago School of Law. and stayed in Chicago ever since. I originally wanted to come here and be a public interest attorney, dabbling in civil rights law, and it did not work out that way. I realized in law school, I had some really pivotal moments in law school where I really truly realized how systems work and educational systems work, where you can be very prepared and very talented, but if you don't have access to certain resources, you just can't maximize your opportunities. It was really, 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 really impactful on me and just my law school experience and really my career path. And that really gave me an understanding of higher education and academic administration. It was like my first preview of understanding how much a well crafted and intentional academic experience impacts the students that go through it and how they're able to succeed. So that really was something that really scratched my interest when I was in law school and I began volunteering after I got out of law school with the organization Minority Legal Education Resources that's based here in Chicago that primarily helps students of color, first generation low income students pass the bar exam here in Illinois. And it was just an opportunity to really find myself professionally. It was the beginning of me really finding myself professionally. I went to work for the court under Joy Cunningham when she first went on the bench in the appellate court. I was a clerk for 2 years. And then after that, I shifted into higher education. And it really just changed my life. I started at Chicago State University for a few years, which is it was in 5 years, I got what most people probably get in 15 to 20, just because it's really the life of anybody who has worked at a small institution, a low resourced institution, an institution without an endowment is probably a better way for listeners to really think about it. That's primarily resourced from state and federal funds, and it's predominantly Black institution. You are going to do a lot of things very fast. And I happened to get a crash course in a lot and had some really good mentors at the time. And I was there for 5 years. And then in 2014, I shifted over to Northwestern University and I went into Weinberg College. And as it was announced probably about a week or two ago now, I'll be shifting into the office of the provost to be the inaugural assistant provost of undergraduate education.
Congratulations on that appointment.
Thank you.
Long time coming. Constance and I are old colleagues from all the way from Chicago State, and then we met again at Northwestern. So I have been front and center for the entire journey, career journey. And so that's why I was so adamant to make sure that you got on in this first series. So let's back up a little bit. Thank you for giving all that context, all that background context. If you don't mind, I want to go back and just unpack a couple of segments that you mentioned, that you highlighted here. Let's start all the way back from childhood. So you knew at the age of 9 that you wanted to be an attorney. Can you talk to me a little bit about what put that dream and nugget into your mind, please?
My daddy. That's probably the best way to put it. So I grew up in a household. My dad was adamant about us really having a strong understanding of just Black people and Black people across space and time and the history of Black people in the United States. So that in itself really gave me an understanding of really the fight for freedom, the fight for humanity, to be treated as human beings and equity in this country. And in my mind, particularly when we saw a lot, that was back in the days where you were going to watch Eyes on the Prize and you could really see these more nuanced stories of how the civil rights movement was built and how the different movements for rights for marginalized people were really built. I really, really wanted to be a part of something bigger than myself to really help my people just gain equitable rights in this country and understanding that fight had changed over time. My dad was just very, very adamant about making sure we really understood that. And I think at that age was really, I think two things really were important, if I'm being very honest. I wanted to be a part of this fight. I wanted to be a part of this movement, this continuous movement to make sure people who had been denied equal rights had access to rights. And I wanted a career that I thought at that time could bring me more financial resources. We were not a household that had an abundance of financial resources, and seeing law as a way to be able to have an opportunity to be in a profession that could provide financial resources. So those two things were front and center in the way that a 9-year-old can imagine them. But I think that was my guiding light throughout all of that.
Awesome. So, talk to me about your educational upbringing. You said that you shared previously that you are a product of public schools in West Philly. Talk to me about that journey and how you navigated educational system. Maybe just talk to me about how you navigated that.
So I think it's incredibly important to shout out my mom, and something that was very key in getting us together. So my mom, first of all, just stayed at home with us and was very deliberate and intentional about just laying a really good foundation when we were really young. So 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are clearly, think about educational development, key years. My mama was very adamant about making sure that we knew just the foundation. And I don't want to ever take her out of it, because this doesn't happen without her doing not only that work, but when she started working again, she was working at a library in New York City, a private library in New York City. And somebody mentioned to her about a school that was, is before charter schools were really a thing. It was a school that, the best way to put it, like a selective enrollment school in today's nomenclature, because she was looking for a school for my older sister. Because when they were looking at neighborhood schools, my sister already had her foundational skills together and just the substantive knowledge that you would expect a student going into kindergarten to have. And they told my mom, when they were covering these topics, they were going to put my sister in a corner. So my mom knew that was not going to work for my sister, because she was going to tear that place up when she was bored. So she started asking people about what kind of school she could go into. And she was given a suggestion of a school called School for the Talented and Gifted that was in the middle of Spanish Harlem, where you had to test to get into it. And my sister got in. And my parents really sacrificed. Like, I cannot articulate enough how much they sacrificed to not just get her there, but then get me there. Because we lived in the Bronx. And if anybody knows anything about the geography of New York City, to get your two small children from the Bronx to Spanish Harlem every day, to school and back to school, is a Herculean feat. But my parents sacrificed to put us in that environment. It was an amazing educational environment, diverse environment, an environment that nurtured all of its students. It was a school that had kids that looked like New York City at that time, but it literally was a foundation for us in terms of just getting a quality education, but truly putting us like on a really, really, really tight track. And my family moved to Philadelphia when I was 9, and within a month I skipped a grade. So that's how important like that school was. And that's why I always shout out, like, quality public schools really do change everything. Something that everybody has access to, because that key decision, you can track everything else just to that key decision right there.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And yet another testament of the different sacrifices and strategies that parents have to make from the jump and are unfortunately still having to do today. I remember, I'm a product of Chicago public school system. And I knew once I was expecting my first child, by the time she was 2, I was already in selective enrollment informationals, and that had a fee attached to it. And so just being exposed, like, wow, all these decades later, the system is still at play and sacrifices are still needing to be made. So thank you for shouting out, and shout out to mom and dads out there continuing to strategize and make sacrifices for their little ones to have equity within their educational experience. So let's fast forward to college. You said you started off at North Carolina State University. Talk to me and give me some highlights about your undergraduate experience and how that led you to continue your dream of pursuing law.
So I wanted to go away from home for college, and my mother's family is all in North Carolina. So I went to North Carolina State University, which was the school that my grandmother worked at in food service for decades. And a couple of my aunts and uncles went to, and it was a place where, first of all, I met the best friends of a lifetime there, and it really was a place where I could be I could sit in and really learn about things that were important to me because I really don't believe that I could be where I'm at with the intentionality of where I'm at right now without getting that sociology degree and getting that minor in Spanish. They're incredibly important in me understanding people, understanding the history of people, and really just one of the few times where I feel like you get the opportunity to sit and just think, assess, and kind of just be that scholar that if you don't have a PhD, you don't really get as much time in your professional career to really sit in that as a part of just like outside of like your free time. I really just drank it up. Like I loved that curriculum. I loved being able to learn just what happened. And quite frankly, it was actually incredibly important in me putting the building blocks together of what happened in terms of policy and structures, some of the things I saw growing up. Because when I reference, like, oh, I grew up during the heart of the war on drugs, some of the biggest, like, I knew certain things because my dad was very open with us and we had conversations about politics and about all these different components that created the systems that we saw around us. But being able to study it and really think about, like, what actually was happening in the 80s, in the 90s, in particularly the mid Atlantic area of the United States in terms of state policy, federal policy, and created the circumstances. Why were there so many homeless people? Why were there so many mentally ill people around the street? How come there? What happened with? Why were there so many drugs? So many drug addicts? I put all those building blocks together, and for me, that was like, okay, I got it. Like everything just locked in, and it was incredibly important, and gave me a different perspective of who I wanted to be when I moved on to law school. I was like this when I was in college. I almost wish I wasn't so, I won't say focused, but only focused on getting to law school. But it made me more driven because I really wanted to make a difference and make sure there was more opportunity. And I realized that it's almost like the cocoon my parents put around me that I almost hated growing up. It literally created the runway for me to be able to be focused and move forward and not have as many distractions. And it just lit a fire under me. So by the time I got to law school, I was like, I'm ready to go because this college really just it fed me. It just fed that intellectual curiosity around just what happened. And then once you hit me up with a system and and I start understanding, oh, okay, this policy created these conditions on the ground. These things made sure this thing happened. It was a wrap for me. I was like, oh, okay, okay, okay. It's time to get in the game. It's time to like boots on the ground. Like for me, it was like putting a battery in my back. I was excited to do something that
Mhm.
was going to make a difference.
So, sociology major. Now, one of the things I often hear about pre law or folks who aspire to go on to law school, the number one more popular major, well, uh, a strategy that I often heard from a leader was encouraging undergraduates to major in English if they wanted to move on to law school. Is that something you agree with? Were you told that? And what made you choose sociology?
I wasn't told anything because the thing I think I was so under advised. That's a whole other conversation about like some of it is just me being stubborn and just being like this. Like stubborn isn't the right word. I think when you do well, particularly at very large state schools, the advising systems are very different versus like particularly what's in the landscape. There was no social media back then. So the reality is I kind of just knew how to do certain things and I was just like right here. I chose sociology because I came into school undeclared and I was in a program that previewed all of the different majors that were available and I connected with sociology. I was like, oh, this is going to tell us why these things are the way they are. And I was curious about why these things are the way they are. Now, here's the thing about English. The reason why people are telling folks that want to go to law school to major in English is you need to write well. when you get to law school. And you need to be able to identify, you need to be able to issue spot. The skill sets that get developed in an English major are incredibly key to a law degree. So that's one of the biggest reasons why it's you have to be able to write well, you have to be able to dissect complex text. the critical thinking skills that go into upper level English courses. Like they are very key in a legal curriculum. So that in itself is why students are directed in that way. And I also think, the fun thing is you get 4 years of English in high school, but depending on your high school, depending how many resources are really put into that, you won't be able to get around not having that skill set in law school. Hard stop. And all the other skill sets that get developed in an English curriculum, you will not be able to be successful. You won't even be able to put together a competitive application, much less be successful without that. I want to be incredibly clear because a lot of times people throw away these majors without understanding like the skills that are getting built, the experiences that happen. And it's incredibly important to understand really the heart of the humanities and how they are so critical for the key positions and careers we need in a functioning society.
Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that because I am also a product of humanities. Got my bachelor's in psychology, and yes, thank you for amplifying that. All my aspiring lawyers or law students, I really hope you're taking notes with this because Constance is dropping some gems. All right, so let's move on into your journey. Let's fast forward to your first professional career, whether it's the clerkship or Chicago State, whichever one you want to highlight first. Would love to get would love for you to unpack how you landed those opportunities and some highlights of things that you learned along the way.
I'll briefly talk about my time at the court. I think it's probably more important to talk about CSU. How I landed my job at the court was quite frankly being active in networking. I met Justice Cunningham, when I was the president of Black Law Student Association. She was an active alum, and that's how I began engaging with her. And I want to put as a footnote, talking about networking is a more important thing that has risen to the top now in our conversations about building a career and being in college. I think it's always been something. If you went to an HBCU, depending on where you went to school, you may not have gotten that message. I think it's incredibly important for students to understand just the importance of building a level appropriate network. And I say that because it's like you really have to understand who do you need in your world and being intentional about that, because you just really never understand how to leverage a network. And there's a lot to it. And it's not just having relationships with people, it's understanding how to leverage relationships with people, whether it be peers, mentors, or sponsors. So essentially meeting Justice Cunningham in that space, essentially she was like it was more of a sponsor relationship at that point in time. And I think that that is something that I didn't expect from that, but it came out of that. But that's a part of service. One of the best ways to build a network is through service to community in all the different ways that that can take. I think that particularly to listeners, when you are a young professional and you are in school, understanding what your skills, talents, passions, and interests are, and having a level of service, particularly aligned with your passions, is incredibly important and useful to opening the doors to key mentors and sponsors. So that's number one. My job at CSU came really in a really different manner. So it's more to the like, God really wanted me in higher education because this is how this really story went. It's real basic. I had a mentee who babysat for a family all summer. He was going into his sophomore year at Morehouse, and his family was having a goodbye dinner. They invited me to the dinner, and while we were waiting for dinner to get done, he needed to collect his last paycheck from a family that he worked for all summer as a babysitter. I walked him to get that paycheck. I left out with a job. Now, granted, I needed that job. I ain't gonna hold you. I needed that job because this was also at the height of the first Great Recession. So the legal field had almost collapsed. It did collapse, almost. It did at that point in time. And no, like younger professionals really were not getting jobs. And not having a job because my clerkship had ended, and I really started to clearly I was in the middle of an aggressive job search, but I really started to think to myself, okay, take the limits of fear off, because there is a fear of getting a professional degree, accumulating the debt of a professional degree, and then not being able to find a job in it. It's actually one of the most soul crushing things that you can experience. And I had to ask myself, outside of the fear and ego around not getting a legal job, what would you want to do? And the answer was what I was doing in service with MLER, Minority Legal Education Resources. I wanted to help students do better and have access to tools to help them navigate educational systems. That was with all the limits off. If I was honest with myself, that's what I wanted to do. So opportunity comes up at CSU in athletics. Was it really actually in my mind aligned with what I wanted to do? No. Put it in a rainbow ahead of me and let it flash. Absolutely not. But it was in education, and it was something that I knew I could be good at. So I took the job. And the one thing I'm always is a lawyer. And it was a role, it was the assistant director of academic services in the athletics department. CSU is a D1 school. And I was essentially the academic services arm of the athletics department. And the one thing I knew how to do was operationalize some practices and policies. So that's really where it really started, and it really helped me. It's because I was operationalizing practices and procedures. And I think what's incredibly important for any young professional to know is, outside of your degree, outside of your job, what are your, I go back to skills, talents, passions, and interests, because you need to understand how to apply those things to any situation that you're in, whether you're volunteering, whether you have, I don't care if you have one or two jobs, like where do those and how do those show up? Because you need to be able to honor any opportunity that you have. Because the mistake that I almost made was like, oh, this is a little yang job. As soon as the legal field picks back up, I'll shift over. No, this was actually a real launching pad, because the department had a lot of challenges at the time. And I was actually one of the first people to pick up on it and start like alerting people to it. So as that occurred, I actually was able to keep my job when the entire administrative staff of the athletics department was terminated. And in that, now that was not an easy time. I'm never going to act like it, because when you are in those first 5 years of your career, friends, the one thing you're going to do is work. And you also, like, one of the biggest lessons that I think that gets excluded in conversations about career development, particularly on social media, is how much you need to plant yourself to get good, to learn your industry and get good at your job, and learn the interconnectedness between what you're doing in other jobs, not just in your organization, but in your actual field. It is critical. And those first 3 years, like the first year was rough. The first year and a half was rough in one way. That second year and a half was rough in a completely different way. But the difference was I had a phenomenal mentor. General counsel took over athletics, and associate general counsel was someone who was an attorney who she and I became incredibly close. And she gave me the mentoring I needed as a young attorney, knowing my field, and as a young professional. Now, that woman worked me hard, but I got so much during that year and a half that I still use those gems to this day. And was I getting paid equivalent to the labor that I put forward? No. I'm still using everything I got from that mentorship relationship. And I think that that's
I love
really
it.
critical.
I love it. Thank you. It sounds like you grew up at Chicago State. Like that's where you really put your big girl pants on, and you worked, you grinded, you had a mentor who saw you, who challenged you, but knew that you were capable of it, and you leaned in. You leaned in, and thank you for imparting that wisdom, imparting that strategy, and just reality that the first 3 to 5 years of your professional career, you're still a student. You're a student to the game, as a previous guest shared. You're a student to the game, and it's important
Mhm.
to lean into that. So thank you for sharing that. Once. Two, would love for you to, because I can keep you here all day, Constance, but I promise I'm gonna get you
We
out
got
of here on
time.
time.
No, we
I'm
got time.
wondering
I have time.
how you talked about all the things that you learned at Chicago State, how to today you're still using that. Can you talk to me about how that catapulted your transition to Northwestern, and what was that? What has that journey been like for you?
I think so. I think a couple of things that are important, even in the journey, is you really need to learn to grow where you are planted, and not. I think a lot of times when you're in small spaces, we don't always honor the beauty of small spaces and big roles in small spaces or big opportunities that don't necessarily have big titles. I think that's incredibly important because you want to get good when there is less spotlight around you because you're able to make mistakes that can be better managed versus when you're in bigger spotlights. And I mean that sincerely. And there are certain lessons that I needed to learn in that space that, quite frankly, I didn't have an option of whether to learn them or not because of what circumstances I was put in. But you really need to learn those lessons before the stakes become much greater. And one thing that I think was incredibly important for me to learn, I always knew that I could work hard and I could deliver under tough circumstances because I'm a trained attorney. Like I'm a trained licensed attorney. That's just the nature of that work. But the ability to stand your ground with people with more hierarchical authority, people who have more power than you, people like that's CSU because my first job was in athletics. I was I was like, I was catapulted up to academic affairs my last 2 years. And I would be sitting in President's Executive Council, and I was quite young. I was at that time, I was like in my late 20s, early 30s. Ain't nobody up in their late 20s, early 30s sitting up in the most provost office. Most people in there are in their 50s and 60s. And in those kind of environments, I love my people. I love my people down. But black people don't be caring what some young person who don't know what they're talking about saying. And I knew that. So I knew I had to come sounding like I had some sense and I had to come prepared and I could not play games. So I always took that approach in that environment, but I also had to learn the politics of the environment. I mean, I think at one point in time, one of my favorite TV shows to this day is The West Wing. I tell people this all the time. I learned how to navigate the politics of higher ed through watching The West Wing. I learned so much because when I started seeing what was going on around me, I was like, yo, I need to dig deep. And I was always a fan of the show. Then I started studying the show, studying how they were doing the work and navigating politics. And I started putting that crap to work. And it was working because you got to be strategic and thoughtful about how you navigate these spaces. I needed to learn how to be great, not just survive where I was. And I did really well, but my portfolio was starting to get unmanageable because in those kind of environments, the gift you get for doing well is getting more work. So I knew I needed to leave just because I was not having any kind of quality of life. Because when the thing about being at small state schools that don't have any resources, budget cuts can come at any time. You always get extra work. Like it just is not sustainable in the way that my portfolio kept growing. So that's really why I started applying to any job that was appropriate for my next step. Because typically I wouldn't leave a job after 2 years, but I knew it was just not sustainable to keep a portfolio that large and not be compensated for it or get any type of support or relief. And you just have to know when it's your time. And when I knew that really just wasn't going to change, it was time for me to go. And I just applied. Me applying to Northwestern was the first job I had ever applied to, like traditional, like blind. Let me just go ahead and fill this application out. Put my resume in to upload it through a job site and keep it pushing. I got a job. So moving up to Northwestern was a completely different experience for a variety of reasons. With one of the biggest reasons being, um, I did not, I did not go to schools like Northwestern. Now, I was used to being in the environment of a school like Northwestern because my mother worked at the University of Pennsylvania. So she worked in the libraries and we were always around that environment. So in some ways that wasn't different, but it's a different being a player in that game going to this institution. I'm very different. I didn't go to schools like this. I did not get a PhD. I have a JD. I don't have a PhD. So really making sure I knew who I was walking in the door, all the lessons of, working in with the president's executive council, staffing the president, staffing the provost at CSU, it got me ready to be here because quite frankly, it's almost the same thing. Like you have to know who you are and you got to be right. You got to be thoughtful and you got to understand the environment. I just put those lessons immediately to work at Northwestern and I had a journey and it's been a journey.
Oh, can you hear me? Oh, all right, there we go. For some reason, I couldn't get the mute button to unmute. But yes, a journey is a great way to to describe that your time at Northwestern. But I love how you. It sounds like you did the work to make sure you weren't walking in with imposter syndrome. That you knew that you not only deserved to be there, but you had the experience and expertise, different type of terminal degree to still be in the room and make impact. Love that. Thank you for naming that. And you arrived at Northwestern shortly before I did, and I remember that was a similar strategy or words of encouragement that you gave me, knowing that my leadership role, my dream job was at Chicago State's small state school, under resourced, underfunded, but yet grew up in those 3.5 years. I mean, sitting in rooms that I had a seat at the table and really didn't. I mean, there was one senior leader meeting where I thought they were speaking a different language. I didn't record the meeting, but I was just trying to memorize everything because afterwards I went to work and was learning and all these things, and thankfully have folks like you and other mentors who were encouraging me and helping me along the way, and really proved to be pivotal for my transition to highly selective schools such as Northwestern. So talk to me. This is my last question for your career journey.
No,
Talk to me about how um, how your experience, how all of your experiences landed you into this inaugural role of assistant provost of undergraduate education or undergraduate experience. Please correct me on this.
education, undergraduate education.
Undergraduate education. Please talk to me about um, how that all happened for you.
I think it's important to just, and I think it's can be used for a lot of different industries, but particularly for folks who are in higher education. I'm a student-centered educator, hard stop. I don't care where I'm at, I'm a student-centered educator, and I want to understand the experience of my students. I want to understand it through their narratives, but I also want to understand it through that data and just really on paper. And I want to understand the systems that students are navigating to be able to get their degree. I know there's a lot of conversation in like the national zeitgeist and just conversation about higher education and education in general, but there's no one type of student. All of us who are educators know there's no one type of student. Any given class or institution is a collection of students who have varying norms and varying starting points that are navigating it. Your goal as an educator is to understand that and create a system that can reach all of them. And I think that that is something that you have to be incredibly intentional about by building relationships with your colleagues, building relationships with students, and then understanding those systems through the lens of so many different types of students. That is something you must do with humility and intention. I'm somebody who's always worked in, done pipeline work for law. And then when I got to NU, started a lot of pre-med work, first focusing on URN students and then Figley students. Really making sure that students that have been traditionally not accounted for in the pipelines for professional education have a real shot at not just getting into med school and law school, but also thriving in those environments and getting equitable post graduation outcomes. You have to understand all of your students. And that to me is the mark of a good educator. And that is truly how I've tried to just do my job. I have a variety, my portfolio is large in the college, and just understanding how do we think about exceptions? What does equity mean as all students navigate it? Sometimes understanding that equity means more no's than yeses, and that is actually how it's supposed to be. Understanding what relationships you have to build, understand how people do the work, understanding how your peers do the work. Not just your peers like Northwest, like institutions like Northwestern, Kofi schools. I mean, I want to know how the big publics are doing it. I want to know how the smaller schools are doing it. I'm somebody who believes in mission-driven education, and there are so many different institutions that are doing amazing work. I am an educator that believes in education, the power that education can give any given student to understand themselves, systems, and opportunities, and to realize their brilliance to be able to go beyond their wildest dreams is just the power of education. It can give a student that comes from very few resources the opportunity to not just survive, but actually thrive in any given space. It can give a student the ability to understand the world around them, what has happened, and be a force for change for good. That is the power of education. And for me, the ability to create an experience, to create experiences for a community, to be able to make sure that our scholars are sitting there and are thriving in this space where they can learn and grow and thrive. That to me is the hallmark of being a good steward of anybody's education. And I would challenge all of my colleagues to be in that same space, because the narratives that are coming out don't really match the work that we're doing. Every educator should know who is sitting in their classroom, what kind of experiences we're building for them. And we have been. And to be honest, we have been. It can get, you can market it any other way, but the reality is that educational experiences are more intentional than people realize. The question is who are they being built for? And if we are being honest as educators, we should be thinking about anybody that can come through that door that meet that are aligned with our mission, and thinking about how do we create rich experiences because we understand where our students are coming from and allowing them to thrive from there.
Constance, thank you so much for making that career pivot to higher education. I have single-handedly seen you change the trajectory of so many students, both at Chicago State and Northwestern, where others have given up on them. And you had so many coming to Jesus talks with students, professors, academic advisors, and just pushing students to complete college. I thank you for all the work, all your advocacy for students navigating systems that were not built with them in mind to succeed. So I, for one, personally thank you for all the work you're doing, all the work you continue to do. I am in awe of the impact you have yet to make in this inaugural role. And I will continue to cheer and see from the front lines, and of any however I can support, please continue to let me know, and the village know as well. Constance, thank you so much for your time. Before I let you go, I do have some questions. I always like to do some spitfire questions with all my guests. Thank you all so much for tuning in. So many nuggets and gems. My educators out there, if you have scholars, students, family members who are interested in law, Constance is a prime examples of so many different ways to be a lawyer, in so many different industries. Constance was pulled into higher education, answered the calling to higher ed, and as you all can see, as an inaugural assistant provost, clearly blooming where she has been planted. So please pass on this interview. It will live in Coach Stella YouTube page, and I will share some highlights on Coach Stella Instagram page. Please forward it on to all those who you all think will benefit from it. All right, Constance, you ready for these questions?
Sure, I'll try it. Answer them as well as
Top
I
of
can.
mind thinking. Don't think too
Okay.
hard. Don't think too long. Top of mind thinking. So, first one, if you didn't have to work your job, if you didn't have to do this inaugural role, how would you spend your hours or weeks? What would you spend it doing?
Oh, two things I can answer that. I A, travel, and then B, some service. I'm going to do something for the community.
What community?
I'm really big about access for to professions. Like it would, if I'm being honest with you, the same kind of service that I do right now, I would still be doing. I probably just expand it if I really didn't have to work because I really want to make sure there's something about I particularly care about making sure Black and Brown students have the opportunity to go to law school and med school, and then particular all students that come from a low income background, middle income backgrounds, have the opportunity to go to college and have the opportunity to go to professional school. That is my heart, because one of the most important things that you can do is give folks the keys to be able to be something amazing.
Hmm,
And too many students have talent, but don't have access to paths to be able to do it. You
awesome.
got to make sure that happens.
Love it. All right, second question. What was your last touch grass moment? Meaning, what was the last time you went outside and had your adventure?
Child, this morning, I'm gonna get the, I'm not a spring chicken, I'm a summer hen, so I can't run like I used to because Mother Asthma will whoop my tail. So I'm gonna get some. I switch up how I work up every. I have a regimen that I do every week, and then I do like 2 times a week. I do like 5 miles. So I'm gonna touch some grass, and I'm gonna get out in these streets, and I'm gonna walk because it's a good way for me to clear my mind and think, and just really sit and reflect.
Hmm. All right. So our last two questions. Let's see who does it better. Philly cheesesteak or Chicago Italian beef?
First of all, it's always gonna be Philly. It's not even a question for me. And I love Chicago, but come on, stop.
Okay. Hold on. Philly cheesesteak or Chicago deep dish?
Cheesesteak. All that bread.
Philly cheesesteak or Harold's chicken?
Here's the thing. I wouldn't. That's a pass. I just because you're gonna be salty if I keep so. Give me a chicken cheesesteak. Run me a chicken cheesesteak.
Oh, okay. All right. Philly winter or Chicago winter?
Philly winter. Oh my God. Let me tell you something. You ain't met the hawk till you walk down Wabash Avenue on January 30th. That hawk is going to pick you up by its claws and throw you into one of those L stops. Ain't nothing
Look,
like that. You think you know winter? Be here February 1st.
Chicago winter is unmatched. I will give you that. I will give you that.
Chicago
Constance, thank
wins that one. I just want to tell you, Chicago wins. If there's a win, Chicago wins that one. But I also think
we got
Chicago summers are unmatched. Chicago summers are unmatched. This is my favorite time of year.
it. I mean, to be outside in Chicago, summertime
Favorite
shy
time.
is what we call it. You missing out if you haven't touched grass in Chicago during the summer season. All right. All right, folks. Well, there you have it. We have our career journey with the wonderful Constance Wright all wrapped up. So many nuggets, so many gems shared. Constance, thank you so
Thank you
much.
so much.
Is there any last minute words, thoughts, wisdom that you would like to embark on our audience before I let you go today?
First of all, thank you for having me. And lastly, I just want to encourage everybody. Like I know it's hard right now, but our peoples have faced harder times and they still dream big enough dreams that we're here right now. It's time to find your area where you know that you have a passion for making sure things get better in, and let's work it. Everybody's not going to be doing everything, but particularly if you are an educator, do not waver on being a steward of students' educational journeys. It is hard right now, but the one thing we know is that we win. Find your area, plant your feet 10 toes down, and let's get to work. Because now is the time for warriors and generals. It is not the time for heroes. So let's get to work.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Constance. Thank you, everyone. Tune in next Thursday. We have another career journey that will leave you all with so many gems and nuggets. Have a great weekend. Be kind to yourself, but more importantly, be kind to others. Thank you, Constance.
Thank you so much. Everybody have a good one. Thank you so much.